Our topic, the title of our webinar today is to trust or not to trust, that is the question. And we will explore the construct of trust, the neuroscience behind it, its role in a coaching relationship, and how it influences coaching outcomes. Of course, this touches upon the third core competency, creating trust and intimacy with the client. And as it is described by the ICF, we have the ability to create a safe, supportive environment that produces ongoing mutual respect and trust. I have found that when we teach this competency, most of our focus is on trust. And from a certain perspective, there is a reason trust can be understood as the door for intimacy. Trust is an integral part of every relationship we have. And to a certain extent, it is present in all human interactions. I have a question to you. What made you become interested in the topic of trust? So that's my question to you, all of the participants. What made you become interested in the topic of trust? Priya shared at the beginning, and feel free to put in the chat box. And let's see a couple of replies. Trust is often broken. Okay, that's interesting. Ways to develop relationships. Yep. The foundation of any relationship, again, to coaching engagement. And one question that I like to ask my students when teaching coaching, when training them on coaching, is if without trust we can have any of the other core competencies. So it's not the foundation only to the coaching, engagement, to the entire coaching process. The bedrock, cornerstone. It's difficult to gain trust. Okay. That will be interesting also to explore. The first and foremost thing to start with, okay, difficult to trust myself. Okay, essential to coaching relation, foundation again, safety, peace, okay. And yes, this is also true. Trust in leaders is exceptionally low across the world, and we can add currently. Let me tell you my story. As a coach, I first became interested in the topic of trust in 2009, so 10 years ago. I remember that I was heading, during the ICF conference in Orlando, I was heading at the session of Charles Feldman, eager to find answers. And most of my questions were about how to repair trust. You see, back then, I was one of those people who believed that we have to work on trust only once it is lost. Later, in my career as a coach, I started observing the differences of how, in my previous profession, as a therapist, I was establishing trust, especially when working with groups, and how I was experiencing the same thing, when I was a member of a coaching group as a participant. I also reflected on the sometimes unconditional trust in other activities in my life. And my curiosity grew bigger, wanting to implement my past knowledge to my current work with my clients. So 10 years ago, I started the journey of curiosity. And 10 years later, I'm still learning about trust, teaching about it the last years. And now here I am, given the opportunity and responsibility to share with you my insights. One of my activities, we often refer to coaching as a dance. We are dancing alongside the client. And this is me in this photo. In 2010, I wanted to physically experience the absolute trust. And looking at that photo last year, another idea came to my mind. What if instead of dancing alongside the client, what if instead of dance, we talk about dive? Our clients decide to go on a dive with us, trusting that we will provide the safety that is needed. So our purpose and my purpose is to increase our capacity as coaches for this dive. When it comes to coaching, trust comes with many layers. Here we can see some of them. We have the layer of the self, the trust on oneself, the coaching, and the process. And think about it also that as a coach, I have the trust in myself, the trust in my coachee, the trust in the process. And equally, the coachee will have the trust on their own self, the trust in me, the trust in their process. We trust our clients. In a way, we practice unconditional trust. In an article some years ago that we wrote with Stefano Petti, we've explored exactly this example of unconditional trust. That having those traits, we don't expect them, to prove to be resourceful, whole, and creative. We believe in their potential, and we trust that they have the answers. Robert Solomon and Fernando Flores, in their book, Building Trust, describe this kind of trust as committed openness. They describe it as committed openness. And as coaches, we are usually focused on the trust that the client has toward us, the coaches. One of the reasons has to do with the neurophysiology of trust and what happens in the brain of our clients. But what happens in our brain is equally, if not more, important. And we will see later today why. Now, this is a table, a very useful table from a book that I strongly recommend, The Think Book of Trust by Charles Feldman. Before we have a deeper look at this table, if any of you knows about, has heard about the researches on oxytocin, the name of Paul Zak will sound familiar. Based on his research, Paul Zak suggests that when someone observes that another person trusts them, a hormone called oxytocin that circulates in the brain and the body rises. The stronger the signal of trust, the more oxytocin increases. In addition, the more oxytocin increases, the more trustworthy people are. It is a reciprocating trust. Their brains guide them to behave in socially desirable ways, that is, to be trustworthy. Additionally, what happens in our brain when there is trust, and we can see it now in the neurophysiology perspective of it here in the last part of this table, we have the full availability of the neocortex and the limbic system brain structures. That means that our thinking brain and the structures to make decisions and take actions. And we have the ability to intervene in and change pre-programmed neural patterns, essential if we want to support the self-directed neuroplasticity. With our clients, we are trying to create new habits, and we know that we are creatures of habits, and we have the wiring, the patterns that we already have. So we are relying a lot in the ability, the neuroplasticity that our brain has to create the new patterns, the new habits. And the bad news from the neuroscience is that we cannot destroy the old wiring, but the good news is that we can always create a new wiring. What is interesting also in this table is about the behaviors that are observed as a result. We have, when we are in a space of trust, we have collaboration, listening, open communication, sharing of information, dialogue of ideas, hope, expectation of the best, curiosity, as shown in the engagement in conversations, and even the examinations of our own actions. And of course, the ability to make decisions, to take actions, and to create new habits. This is one of the reasons why I sometimes become irritated when, if I may say that, when there are programs in organizations that are targeting these behaviors. because they're doing exactly that. They are targeting just the organization, the behaviors, without going to the root. What is happening behind that? For example, okay, we want to create a more collaborative space here and encourage people to engage more in the conversation, to give more, for example, their input, or to communicate better and freely. And they see, oh, you know, we have people that are complaining, resisting, blaming. They are not sharing their information, ideas. So let's do, for example, a workshop to have a team building activity. And maybe during this workshop, things will run smoothly, but this hasn't addressed anything. So we have to explore what is behind any behavior that we are observing. We usually examine the neuroscience of trust to understand how coaching works and how it supports the client's learning, changing patterns, creativity, decision-making, etc. There is another layer to it. What happens in the brain of the coach and our own hormonal system. Aren't, after all, the behaviors that we see here necessary for the coaches to have and exhibit in their coaching relationship with the client? Being us, the coaches, in this space of trust means that we are able to be resourceful. We are able to respond to our client with open communication, with empathy, to feel comfortable not knowing, to let the client do the work, to be creative, and equally partner with the client in this dance or the dive. Let's go back to this photo again, to the notion of the dive or skydive. The coach could be represented by the instructor in the back. The client, myself in this case, makes the jump first. We cannot fall unless I fall. So, but I have the certainty that I have with me all the way my instructor. And the parachute is in my instructor's bag. It's not in back, it's not in mine, as you can see. The instructor, on the other hand, trusts in his ability to keep me safe, to respond to whatever happens in the air and during landing. Trust in his equipment, the process, even in myself, that I will not do something stupid and jeopardize both safety. Now, if we see the analogy of us as coaches, what is the trust that we bring? Okay, interesting analogy, yeah? Any ideas? I have you, Priyanka, I have you, you can depend on me. Mm-hmm. Yes, I can repeat the question is, if we see the analogy of us as coaches, what is the trust that we bring? Oh, another analogy. I'm like the bank of a river that is moving to the ocean. So we have more analogies here. Trust in the process of coaching, installing confidence in the coachee, being non-judgmental, being there for the client, listening, yeah. Willing to be vulnerable, yes. Yeah, because we fall together. Mm-hmm. We hold the space for the client in full trust. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what is also the equipment that we are bringing, right? It's our competencies, the tools we know. So there are, we can expand it and explore every element of that. Trust is the resourcefulness of the client, best interest at heart, yes. Great. The ethical practice, being on time, yeah. Thank you. I think maybe we can, if you can copy all the replies that come to the chat box after, it will be useful.
I will do that for you. I'll do that for you, Katerina.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay. I would like to ask you to do a self-assessment, and because there are quite a questions here, I will try to copy them and put them on the chat box. So bear with me while I do that. So I would like you to rate yourself on a scale from 1 to 10. So 1 is not at all, 10 is absolutely. And I would like you to take each one of these questions and put a number that applies to you and yourself as a coach only. So you can put a rate, a number, and you just keep them because we are also going to use them in an exercise later on. So do I trust myself as a coach? And you write your number here. Again, you rate yourself on a scale from 1 to 10. No one will see it, don't worry. Do I feel comfortable not knowing? No, you don't need to write that here. You don't write anything on the chat box now. You just write them in a piece of paper. Do I feel comfortable not knowing? Do I feel open to uncertainty, but confident that whatever comes up, I can keep my client and myself focused and safe? So you rate yourself in that also. And the last one is, what about the process? Do I fully trust the coaching process? That if I stay in this space where the client is the expert and me the facilitator of his or her potential, do I trust the answers and that change will come? So on a piece of paper, you rate yourself on these questions, on these points, on a scale from 1 to 10. And you keep them because you are going to use them later on. As a mentor coach, one of the most common patterns of new coaches that I have observed are about our own self-judgment and how it gets in the way. Our insecurity that could drive us from leading the agenda of the session to withholding insights, perspectives, or even feedback from our clients. Recently, I heard from a very experienced coach that he does mostly consulting, and he told me in a very, comfortable and natural way, because if I stay only in coaching, it will not work. The client will not get the results. Of course, I was super surprised, and I would love to have them in further training about that. But it is evident that we easily make assumptions about the specific outcome of the session because we feel that we should understand what the client is wanting. And if we bring more curiosity, we can make it about ourselves. Just last week in a mentor coaching session, the coach wasn't asking more clarified questions because she had exactly this concern. Or another concern, or we can observe pushing the client into actions because our performance and our competence as a coach should be measured by the tangible results we assume the client should have, another assumption that we have. We experience doubt that if we stay with clean questions, the process might not work and the client needs to be supported faster. The assumptions about the speed of the results, of the outcomes. We feel uncomfortable when the client is stuck. We become helpers, problem solvers, instead of connected observers, like the hero in the drama triangle, for those of you who are familiar with the drama triangle. If you are not, please, I strongly advise to have a look at that and observe how the coach can easily get into this role of the hero. Now, when I started coaching, I had one more challenge to face. I was coaching in my non-native language. My support structure was a list of questions that I had by my side and tools and exercise that I will review before the session. Now, I take nothing. I stay open. The knowledge, the tools are all inside me. Like a library of resources that will come up when my brain makes the necessary correlations from what comes up to the session, and the right exercise or tool or questions or activity will show up to me. Should I have been stressed to think of them in advance, I would have closed my brain to all the other possibilities. And how unfair would this have been to my clients and also to myself? But the topic of trust goes beyond what happens in the session with the coaching. It's about the entire relationship inside and outside of the coaching sessions. One of the biggest lessons about it is I keep receiving it from my supervisor. During one session, during a supervision session, I expressed concern, even fear about the actions of a client, a manager. And there were actions that would compromise how the CEO and the HR director would perceive me as a professional. My supervisor keeps challenging me. In that case, he challenged me asking, what is the compassion I could show to my coachee and to the company? That question made me realize that we were going back to the topic of trust. I was afraid of having this conversation openly with my clients, the coachee, the HR director, and I was losing trust in my coachee, assuming the motives or the awareness of his actions. Let's go back to the slides. Oh yes, I can repeat the reference to the hero with the drama triangle. I can send these resources after the webinar for those of you who would like to know more about it. So Jal and Priya, if you could remind me after the webinar to send these resources also.
Sure, I'll do that, Katerina.
So, wanted to know more about how supervisors, coaching supervisors are seeing the topic of trust in the sessions with the coaches. Last year I conducted a survey in which 33 coaching supervisors participated. We're going to see some of the results. The full report of the survey can be found in the research portal of the ICF if you would like to access it and download it. Now, one of the questions is, how often have you noticed the issue of trust arising in your supervision sessions with your supervisees? And you can see that a quarter of them said that always, and on 66% actually of them replied regularly or always. And we had only one who replied as never. Which of the following topics are connected with trust have you noticed or worked on with your supervisees? And here we can see that on the top we have topics about the confidence of the coach on oneself, the willingness of the coach to be vulnerable, and also something that the coach focused on performance, which we could also somehow connect it with the confidence. Again, you can access, I can send also actually Ujjal has the slides, so you can send it to all members and you can have also access to that. Okay, let's see, okay. So other questions that we have was about the partnership, the consistency, empathetic and compassionate behavior towards the coachee. So that's also my challenging question always from a supervisor. What's the compassion that you can show? The openness, respect, resistance to feedback, and other. And it's interesting because here we have the resistance to feedback from the coachee, but it would be a good question to reflect on what about the feedback regarding the coach. And another question from the cases that were brought up during the supervision session connected with trust, in how many of them did the coach know upfront that they were connected to trust? Before that means this awareness came up as a result of the supervision conversation. And you can see that most all has 0 replies, and some has here the majority of the replies on that. In another question, I asked them to share an example where a topic that was brought to supervision, which initially seemed irrelevant to trust, ended up being about trust. And I would like to share with you 3 examples of these answers, because I think that they are very helpful. The first example. In a recent session, the coach began to subtly lead the client to what he clearly saw as the obvious solution. For 12 minutes, in a 20-minute session, it was evident that he was pushing the client towards what he, the coach, saw as the only right solution. On review, the coach had been completely unaware of this issue as a demonstration of lack of trust in the client's ability to be in charge of their own decision-making. Initially, he did not see that it was a form of disrespect, an opposite value to trust, to believe that the coach has the client's answer. When we coaches think we know better than the client what they should do, we are positioning ourselves as smarter or better than our clients. It takes trust in ourselves and greater trust in our clients to set aside our ego and keep our ideas out of the coaching session. Example number 2. The coach was irritated with a client showing up late or canceling on last minute. And here the comment from the supervisor is how we make assumptions on why the client shows up late. Go back to compassionately exploring and recontracting. And the third example, the supervisee talks about not being as helpful as they would have liked to be with the coachee. And it comes down to not trusting themselves and the lack of confidence in their own competence. Or a supervisee feeling their coachee is not making progress because they are taking the responsibility for progress onto their own shoulder, rather than seeing it as a mutual responsibility and trusting in that. Last question that I asked the supervisors was to write one thing that they would like coaches to be mindful of about creating trust and intimacy. Some of the replies, again, is that trust starts from within. If we put our amygdala to rest, it has a direct impact on our client and that particular conversation. That it is a mutual responsibility. And another supervisor replied that I would like coaches to understand that intimacy in this competency doesn't mean let's now be friends with a client and being closer in the way I treat this person. It means being vulnerable and being aware of all sources of information that come up towards us, being through our body, mind, or intuition. Let me try again to stop sharing and get back to all of you. Last year, I started a crazy program. I take clients to, it's called the Olympus Leadership Challenge. I take clients to Mount Olympus to combine coaching and hiking. 2 of the 4 days of the program, we have an exhausting hiking and some coaching. We live in the refuge. Those of you who are familiar with the refuges in hiking in mountains know the conditions. That means that we have shared bedrooms and bathrooms with everybody else in the refuge. Not the environment what would assume for a relaxed coaching atmosphere. Definitely not an environment that the CEOs and senior executives are used to be. Now, during the first program, for one of my clients, the CEO of a company, this was the first time we also met in person because we are working remotely. At the moment, we were in a small room. We shared a small bedroom, this time only ladies. And at the moment, she opens the door of the shared bedroom while I was changing. It's okay, I said, come in. But I saw her feeling awkward. And immediately asked her, oh, too much information from your coach? We both laughed. The next day, we was coming down to the mountain, and I asked her about it, and I was curious, as her coach, if and how it had impacted our relationship. How she is now seeing me as her coach. After thinking for a while, she said, you know what, I feel more trust. A reply that me and another coach who was present, we heard with surprise. The next day, with the other coach, we reflected about the nakedness of the coach, our vulnerability that we bring to the relationship. the transparency of our full presence. We usually have the opposite of trust as distrust. And what if we have the opposite of trust as control? What is it that we want to control? We want to control the outcomes, the pace, even our image. What happens in the session, how the coachee will feel, or control even our own reactions, our own feelings, what can happen also to ourselves during the session. It's a different control than self-management. And this is important to know. Why? Because when we are in a growth, in coaching, we want to be in growth mode. If we are in control, that means that we are in defense mode and there is no growth there. And we can't remember that we are either in growth mode or in defense mode. We can't be in both. Okay, so far we explored the importance of trust and its impact, but how do we do it? How we do not only create it, but also expand it as coaches. Okay, and let me go back again to the slides. That will be the challenge of the day, the back and forth of the slides, and do it correctly. Okay, oh, here it is. Share. Okay, I think I did it correctly. Okay. But now it doesn't respond. One of the things that we saw was about the layers of trust. So the first step, for one reason that I don't know, I can go back. Okay, so the first step is to understand the layers of trust. The trust in ourselves, the trust in the coachee, and the trust in the process. The second step is to know how to assess trust. Stephen Covey has his own assessments of trust. Charles Feldman has the 4 assessments of trust, and this is my take on the assessments of trust. So what I have here is that, what is it that we assess? We assess character. That includes our integrity, our sincerity and reliability, with our ethics, and we can add also our values. Sincerity is about that I mean what I say, and I say what I mean. Reliability is that I keep my promises, and we don't need to talk about what is about our ethics and values. And I have to tell you that from experience, this is something that is very important when people are assessing our character and choose to work with us. The second assessment is about the competence. This includes our skills, capabilities, and knowledge. Here it is, I know what I can do, and I also know what I cannot do. Surprisingly, people will not only trust us if we go there super confident, we say, yes, this is a piece of cake, of course I can do that. But if we are also reflecting and say, let me think about that, that will also increase the trust. And last one is care. It includes our intent and motive, whose interest we have in mind. Charles Feldman, in a research he made, he discovered that care was the most important factor of all. That if care didn't exist, there wouldn't be any trust. So, next step is to be aware of the myths and assumptions about it. So what are some of the myths and facts? So we as coaches need to know that. For example, one of the myths is that trust is a soft skill, that it takes time and that it is built only on competence. Well, Charles Feldman research proved that it is built also on care, not only on competence, and it is a very important element. And we have to know about the facts. For example, that trust is a pragmatic, actionable asset that we can create. We say, oh, you cannot teach trust. That's what exactly we are doing right now. One of the things is another, trust must be earned. They have to earn my trust. And we hear that all the time also from leaders. Well, this allows, the fact is that we allow others to earn our trust by open up first. So we are the ones that first need to show trust to others. And I have to tell you also, how arrogant is it also the position that I am going to decide when you deserve, my trust, when you have earned my trust. That's not even equal relationship. Ujjal sent me a video, and there was a question about trust. Now, exactly, I don't remember. Oh, it was a point also from the military, if I remember that correctly. And the speaker in his reply said that trust takes time. Oh, it's not something that you build immediately. And this is a myth. Restoring trust takes time. Establishing, expanding it can be done quite fast. I don't know how many of you have experienced that people that we are absolutely have just met, they come and they start trusting in us and they start telling us stories and opening up like they haven't done to anyone else. Well, I have to tell that to me, it happens all the time, even when I don't want to. A very important assumption is cultural. Fernando Flores says that coaching happens in conversations. In these conversations, we are bilingual. We speak our language and we speak the language of the coachee. That includes more than what we could assume. For example, the way a client builds trust is unique to the individual and can be influenced by its culture, experiences, even the biology. I still remember, and it was a great learning for me, one of my first clients. She arrived in the session, and at the beginning, she always was asking me personal questions like, how are you? Or questions about my life. So I was assuming that there was personal questions. Coming from therapy, I was trying to keep myself as much as possible outside of these conversations. I was also being very respectful of the client's time. And I was assuming that I would waste my client's time if I was answering these questions. That was my perspective. So I didn't want to take not even 2 minutes by talking about myself. And my most frequent answers would be, yeah, this is a space for you. You can be selfish and take advantage of every minute of it. Don't worry about me or don't ask about me. Now, the feedback of the client was that she needed to know about me, to know about the person behind the coach, and that would have created a safer and more intimate space for her. So, lesson for me and hopefully for everyone, explore with our clients. What is it that they need to be more vulnerable? When I start at the beginning of every session that I have, especially with teams and groups, we create a part of the contract. It's to put all the conditions that we need to have this as a safe environment. Next, our distrust is very expensive. So what is the cost for you as a coach? What will be the cost of you of this distrust? There are obstacles. We have to acknowledge the obstacles, our own obstacles for trust. Some you can see here, the fear that becoming vulnerable. If we go back to the definition of Charles Feldman, we will become vulnerable, we will become exposed. We will not be safe. The fear of conflict also. An example of that was during again the same program with the hiking. While we were hiking down, there was a moment of conflict. So one of the members of the participants were feeling bad because he was left. Half of the team was left behind, and she wasn't feeling good, and she wanted to understand why half of the team were going faster and weren't, waiting for them. If it was something that was careful, or there was a necessity for that. She just wanted, you know, to know, to understand. So I went faster. I got up with the first team. I requested the hiking guide also to wait for us. And we started having this conversation, and the request was just, you know, to listen to what one of the members had to say. Now, she was also afraid of expressing herself because she was worrying of how she would be perceived. When everybody stopped and everybody listened to her, you know, she overcame this inner obstacle and she started sharing. What happened was that there were some reactions. Now, surprisingly, we had also reactions from coaches, not only from participants. And it was at this point, this open conversation without being afraid of the conflict, but have trust in each other that we can express and listen, that became a model and one of the most important outcomes and learnings for the participants. Not to be afraid of the conflict, and everything that comes up, we can safely discuss it and resolve it and better understand and move forward. Now, we're going back to the steps of creating and expanding trust and maintaining also. The next is to assess yourself. Observe symptoms and work with your supervisor or mentor to identify the causes and a plan to overcome them. And you can use, you know, our supervisor is always a great support for us, or you can work with your mentor, but assess yourself, reflective practice. And sometimes I know that it is difficult also for us to make these questions for us and assess that. Okay, next is to start seeing, speaking, and behaving differently. This will have an enormous impact on establishing and growing trust. What happened when we had this conflict and this conversation, that was also very helpful. It's the language that we were speaking. We were committed to speak and to practice nonviolent communication, to speak compassionately, but also to see the other person compassionately and listen. Okay, let's see. Now, trust is a multi-dimensional construct, and by starting to see, speak, and behave differently, we said that we will have enormous impact on establishing and growing trust. We are going to use that also in the exercise that we will do later. Now, the first challenge in building trust is the recognition that this needs to be built and make it a priority. Even having the best intentions is not enough. How many times we have heard that about the intentions? Remember that we consciously and intentionally develop and sustain trust and a safe environment for our clients to develop and flourish. Now, let me pause, let me stop also here. Okay, the slides. And let's get back to the self-assessment. You remember that you had these questions and you had rated yourself. So I would like, what I would like us to do, oh, we have time, perfect. So what I would like us to do is to have groups. So we have the technology, we can create breakout rooms. You will be divided in groups of 5, hopefully. And your task will be to explore strategies to increase your scores. So let's say that you have noticed that in one question you have, for example, let's say a 6, and your goal would be to make it a 9, let's say, or 10, even better. So what will be your strategy to do that? You can use insights from the assessments of trust, of the behaviors, new behaviors of trust, for trust, anything. And you're going to share your thoughts and ideas with your group, and we will see after, at the end of the time, what has come up for you as coaches. Okay, so let's hear from some of the groups what came up for you. You can unmute your line, and if you want also to put your video on, that will be perfect. Okay, so who would like to share?
Hi, should I go ahead first?
Yes, of course, Prasad. Thank you.
Hi, Katerina. So we discussed a few things, and some things came out was don't worry about the outcomes, and the coach should become just the facilitator rather than worrying about the outcome. The coach should not rate themselves by the success of the client. The coaching conversation is not a validation of your own capabilities as a coach. The coach needs to learn to be okay not knowing, which is, I think, very difficult for me. To be with the client at every moment that they are, and be agile where they want to go. Do not get attached to the outcomes of the coaching session. Trust the process and put trust in the client and give control to them of the coaching process. That's what we discussed.
Thank you, Prasad. And it will be interesting to say, okay, feel comfortable. If you have to be okay to feel comfortable not knowing. So how can I achieve that? What is it that I have to do to feel okay with not knowing? Is it something that I need to change in my perspectives? Is it something that that comes from inside or from elsewhere? Is it about my thoughts, my feelings? So this could be questions also. Yeah. Anyone else? Who else would like to share from your groups?
Okay. May I?
Yes, of course.
All right. The first question, do I trust myself as a coach? I think the journey requires me to be being able to be more focused and in the presence of the person I'm with, the coachee that I'm in. To this, I need to stop pressurizing myself to come up with solutions. And honestly, it is by moving from what we call that doing space to being in the being space, to be more aware of what is happening with the person in front of me as a human being. Okay, his thoughts, his feelings, his fears, and being able to sense it. And if I can do that, I will be, the more I practice it, the more I'm able to trust myself as a coach. I think that is the first one. Then being comfortable not knowing. I think it's all about, for me, it is about sharing my discomfort in not knowing. If I show that vulnerability in myself and I openly say, hey, you know what? I don't have an answer right now, but can we try and co-create an answer together? Okay, what are we looking for? And we get into that space. It takes me minutes to get back. Okay. Again, like Aditya was saying, not an easy thing to do, but I think it takes practice and it takes a little bit of focus, which is linked to the first one. And then being able to be open to uncertainty and being in the space of the person there. I think it is about catching myself on wanting to share and being open, and sometimes the client comes up and says, hey, I want you to share, I want to know, and being able to tell them that, listen, okay, there are things I want to share, but can we hold this for later, and can we sit together and do some exploration and some reflection together now, and then come back to the knowledge that you're seeking, and let's do that a little later. And it's practices of this kind, I think, that openly shared and openly worked with, I think helps build that little bit of trust. Is that journey complete? No, not by a length.
Thank you.
Anybody else would like to speak up here?
Hi, Prasad here, Prasad Palak.
Yes.
Okay, so the two things that we discussed here, one was on the first question, do I trust myself as coach? An interesting point came up that, subconsciously, the coaches at times get attached to the outcome. So what we said, one strategy is to remain detached with the outcomes and not get too obsessed with it, especially during the two coaching sessions where we're always wondering whether things are happening or not, after the sessions. So I think that was one important point where we show that trust with the coaching as well as in the process. And the second one was, are you really listening to the coaching in that conversation? Not just listening to what he's saying, but equally important what he's not saying. I think these 2 points came up. We have to improve trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Prasad.
Katerina, I have a question here, and it's not regarding the self-assessment, but the one slide that you showed about seeing, behaving. I think that there were 3 words. So the question is, when it comes to coaching intercultural or a client from a different culture, how does trust play a factor in those short period of time? Because in some cultures, the clients may generally not open up for a long period of time. And if I have only 3 or 4 sessions with them, how does trust get built in and at a faster pace so that we get we can work with the client well?
Okay, that's a good question. So I'm working mainly with different cultures, with senior executives in different cultures, and the first when the client, either the CEO of the company or the HR director, approaches me to tell me about the assignment and my coachee, there is a request of the meeting. Okay, there will be a meeting when we clarify also expectations, roles, etc. But it's also a meeting to explore if I have the trust of the coachee and if there is the right energy and chemistry with us. So the first thing is that we don't need a lot of sessions to do that, but I also ask my client, okay, what is it that is needed here? For some clients, it will be just the competence. So I have coaches who would only ask me about, what makes me a good coach, for example, if I have what it takes for them. Others clients will only need to know about the confidentiality and they don't care about the rest because, for example, they have the trust that if they chose me, it's perfectly okay. So it is a conversation and an open discussion, again with confidentiality, this first meeting, about what is needed, what is important for the other person to know that yes, I can be the right coach for them. That immediately puts the foundation of the trust in our relationship. Now, we cannot take for granted that this is established and we don't have to keep working on it. I remember it's a recent assignment, recent because usually I have clients that I work a long time with them. And the client was trusting me, but was also concerned because there was an internal huge conflict that was, let's say, the excuse for him to start receiving coaching, although it was part of his leadership development. And there was the legal department of the organization, the HR department, everybody involved in that. So he was resentful and annoyed that he only had to do coaching, although we had explained everything. Now, he trusted in me, but his concerns would come up sometimes. Again, the company, the organization is a multicultural organization, and also the client is not from the same country as I am. And he's from a different culture. Now, in one of our last sessions, he became very upset and he became angry and he became aggressive towards me, and he started like acting out. And I was really sad for that because, of course, I suddenly saw a person who, if someone as observer could see it as attacking me, I as a coach had to see beyond that, and just go and meet the client and stay with him. So I was just there, stayed with my client, and I was acknowledging how he was feeling. It didn't matter that he was feeling, upset with myself at me at that point, but it was to acknowledge how he was feeling and show the compassion to what he was going through. And my attitude had a positive impact, because I have to tell you, okay, that was not easy. The first thought that came to my mind was, if you allow me all to say, was, fuck it, I don't need that. We just, quit the assignment. But that was the initial reaction, the thought that came to my mind. I recognized this thought and I said, okay, what's really happening for my client here? So after that was the acknowledgement, the compassion, the understanding, and recognize, okay, this is how he feels. It was an easy point to break this trust, because at that moment, it seems that he didn't trust me anymore. But my reaction to him, my response, better say, to him, was what changed everything, because immediately he felt heard, he felt understood. Immediately he was more open after he had received also the empathy that he needed. And that was, now we're back to the safety, for me to make the observation that that was a frequent pattern he had when someone was saying something to him, of him becoming defensive and aggressive. And if he could see that as an example. And that was the most significant moment. It was a breakthrough moment for my client, because that's the moment where he was able to actually see his pattern, recognize that, and has his own motivation to change that. There is also an assumption here that if we are from different cultures, we are necessarily different. Of course, we bring our biases, but also if you remember the iceberg, each one of us have below the surface many things. We have the education that we attended, the values of our family, maybe the organization we operate, our personal values. We have our own traumas, past experiences, maybe the stuff that is not obvious, many other things that can influence that. So what we need also as coaches is to be aware that we bring our own iceberg and that the other person is bringing also their own iceberg. And we want to let go of to recognize our bias. Sometimes we say, okay, let go, but they can come up, and we have also to bring this compassion to ourselves and say, okay, yes, it's part of the human nature, but not be attached to that, to recognize them as such. Okay, this is just my bias, this is it. And now let's focus back to my coaching. Don't know if that was helpful.
Thank you. It was. Thank you very much.
Okay. We had some great ideas and strategies shared, and I'm sure you have more to share. I'm thinking also about the time. We have 10 minutes left. One of the things that was mentioned is how I am judging myself. And we have to explore that. Am I making it about myself? Is it the point that I have to, that I think will be the self, and here I'm making about myself? We have to also remember feeling comfortable not knowing. Actually, this is what coaching is about, us not knowing. So the motto for my students lately is the motto of Socrates: I know nothing, because that's what we do. We know nothing about the topic, about what would be, you know, the way forward or anything. There is one thing that we are experts though. We are experts in coaching, and that is enough for us.
You know,
so yes.
Sorry, I'd like to sort of come in here, and I think you know what I experienced, and for some time, and then I've been working on it, and still in the process of working on it, I'd say, is that there's a sense that comes up that, you know, when the client sort of puts you, the coach, on a pedestal, you know, oh, you're the expert who's come here to help us make lives better and grow things and help, you know, build something new. So that getting down from that pedestal is something so important for the coach, is something that I learned with time. It was not something that came to me very naturally. The thrill of getting that adulation or that, you know, respect, or that putting you up in that space was very natural, because, you know, it felt good, it felt right. And yes, you know, one seemed to be there to help. But I realized that in doing so, I was actually not helping, and I was doing the telling and doing all the work, and the client was not ending up doing the work. Undoing that way was very important.
Yeah, so there we were not honoring the fact that in coaching is an equal partnership. Yeah. It's not just any partnership, it's an equal partnership, and we're equals there. And they can put us in a pedestal, but it is, we have to differentiate between being, you know, the experts in coaching, maybe the authority in coaching, but not in their work, necessarily what they are doing. One example is a client that I have. We have been working for years together. When he was the marketing director, he's in a multinational company. So when he was in Asia, he was the commercial director. Now he's in another continent, and he became the managing director. And I was assigned to work with him. And I had no idea. It is in fast consumer goods, and I have never worked in a multinational. I have never been a commercial director. I have never had any experience in this industry. But they trusted that I was the best coach to coach in this specific time, the client, the coachee. And before each session, he sends, I have a form, a follow-up form. So before each session, he fills that in and he sends me. And every time he has the topics, and I have no idea about, you know, these topics. It can be something hardcore business, very specific. And he sends me also updates from everything. And I am there, but what is important that it allows me to learn more the language of the client and understand them better. And sometimes at the beginning, I was experiencing this anxiety. Oh my God, you know, I have no idea, you know, about what he wants now to achieve here. And then I remember, well, okay, so let's go back to the process. What is it that I have idea? And let's stay with the process and see what comes up. So feeling comfortable with not knowing, remember what is my role, remember what is my possibility, and believe, trust the process. I remember also how we have to be bold and courageous because we also become role models for our clients. This is very recent, in just a few months. I was working with a regional director, and he had all his GMs, and we were doing team coaching, and he wouldn't let them finish a sentence. So he will jump in making a joke. Now, we had created a very solid agreement, and every time we repeated the contract and the principles, but he was the first one also to dismiss that. he will delay, so he wouldn't be, or he will interfere, and when I would make a request, for example, for the timing, he would say, okay, it doesn't really matter, don't worry about that. So being bold and trust, also trust myself and trust the process, what needs to happen, and also trust my client. So I went the last day, the breakfast, I had the fortune to be just the two of us, and I went and told him, okay, you have 2 tasks for today. But I look at him very seriously, and I said, you have 2 tasks for today. He said, what are these? Okay, the first is that you let me do my job. I was like that. And he's a person that everybody is afraid of him, because if you're talking about pedestal, he's super high. And I said, you let me do my job. So he was surprised that someone was putting him in his place. And he said, well, so no interfering about what needs to happen, what should happen. You don't compromise my position with your comments. You don't understand it, but it happens. But I said it also in a compassionate way, not blaming him. And the second task that you have to do, and I said to him, that's a big challenge for you, is that you let your team members speak. And when they speak, you just listen and try to understand their own perspective, what they are actually experiencing. That's it, I said. And that was a huge turning point for the team, the entire team, and what happened the last day. Okay, let me, if we have a quick time to share the last part. Okay, so where are my, wait. Something I didn't do right, so I will try again to share also other ideas. Okay, I found it. And again, I have to quickly go to some strategies to grow, maintain, and expand trust. It's from the simple things, from our character. For example, align expectations and intentions. Have this conversation up front with our clients also to understand. Be open, willing to learn. Make sure we keep commitments to ourselves and others. Things, simple things that have to do with our characters. Know what we stand for, live by those standards. Don't worry to keeping notes or time for that. I will share them. We will send them to all of you. What about care? We examine our motivation. What is our motive? What is our intent? And that means that we have awareness about that. If we have any agenda, we share that openly. How generous we are in our listening and our empathy to learn the other person's story. Now, remember that we are always modeling for our clients. And this is something important because that's what they are going to repeat to their own people and beyond that. The competence that we bring. We are committed to be lifelong learners, for example. We also need to ask for support, the help that we need. Take responsibility for results, ask for feedback. Some of the simple things that we can do. I'm afraid we're running out of time. This is my favorite quote about trust. We are never so vulnerable than when we trust someone, but paradoxically, if we cannot trust, neither can we find love or joy. And I will add that we are living in times that trust is challenged. We can see globally that there is a deficit in trust in our leaders, in politics, social leaders, and this is what makes our job even more important, to become role models and to restore that and expand that. Thank you all very much. I don't know if you want to stay a little bit longer. If anyone wants to,
if there are some questions, maybe 5 more minutes, Katerina. Ujjal,
yeah, absolutely.
You can extend for 5 minutes more. Perhaps someone has questions.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Anyone for questions, please?
This is a topic that I can talk about and discuss for hours.
Yeah, I can understand. Well, thank you so much, Katerina, for all, not only sharing your vulnerability in the different situations that you were in, all the examples was so fantastic and just made me feel so so I would say trusting of you, to be able to share so openly and so with such generosity. Not only your ideas, your thoughts, the quotes that you had, the examples, all so wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. You'll be sharing the presentation with us.
Yes, Priya, there is a good question from Ajit. The last example I gave, it was if it was telling. I have to give more context. So one very important thing is you do it in one-on-one, but we have to pay more attention when we do it in teams or groups, is the contract. And by contract, we don't mean only, the professional, the context, what we do, etc. But we are talking about and the logistics. We are talking also about the emotional contract, the principles with which we will operate. For example, we listen to each other, no interrupting. We are open, how we use humor and when, and all these principles. And the other is about the other part for emotional is the expectations. So we bring the personal expectations and we co-create the entire group or team's expectations. Now, in this case, with this leader that I mentioned, we have gone through that, and we had specific principles that we had to follow. And what happened is that their leader was not accountable for, he was not following these principles that we had co-created. And that was lowering the levels of trust. Actually, in one exercise we did, I said to the coach that I wasn't feeling, safe to share my thoughts in this environment. So that was something critical. So it was just a reminder for him that, okay, these are the principles. And also he was the sponsor. So it was outside of the session to someone that I would say as a feedback to the sponsor.
There's something else that's come up is saying, Katerina, did you use the term emotional contract?
No, I don't say, okay, now we are going to do, the emotional contract, but it is part of the process. And all of you, those of you who work with teams, I strongly recommend that you take your time with that. No matter how long it can be. So we have, okay, of course, the agenda, this is the purpose of, this is the logistics, etc., etc., everything that is important about the logistics. If something needs to change in the logistic, we discuss it and we agree everybody. And then we say, okay, and we always write this down and we have them visible at all time. So how do we want to work together? No distractions. What does it mean? Put aside all your mobiles, turn off notifications. We respect the breaks. We have confidentiality. Everything stays here. So we start with the basic and then we add, and everybody contributes that. And we have them as ongoing reminders of what is needed. And then it is about each one of the group to share their expectations. And they can share also fears, insecurities, hopes, desires, everything.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and this is also very useful because this increases their engagement and motivation, and you can get back at the end and to check with them.
Lovely, lovely. That's lots of love and thanks coming out to you, Katerina, as you can imagine. I think somebody is said, Dilip says here, in a stakeholder-centered coaching, one needs to have trust and stakeholder also.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Yeah, great. Lovely, lovely. Well, it's been a wonderful session. 1.5 hours have just flown by. I'm going to remind you once again to share with everyone or share with us, and we'll share with everyone the drama triangle and about the hero piece that you were talking about that people were interested in. There was also a book that you had mentioned at the beginning. I think it was a book of trust. About that book, if you can share details, the author and the full
Book of Trust.
Yes.
Yeah.
Trust by Charles Feltman.
Yeah, so if she can just send out the name correctly.
Book of Trust by Charles Feltman.
Yes, it is also in the slides, so you will find it also there.
Okay, fine, perfect. As long as it's there. Well, thank you very much, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you all very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.